some breaking news which occurred detailing further investigations with the Washington Spirit. We provided listeners in our episode today with an extension of the timeline of things going on with Washington Spirit. And of course, like all things, news broke after we recorded that segment. So the league today released the conclusion of investigations into the Washington Spirit and the allegations around former head coach Richie Burke. They released a statement stating that he is officially terminated from the Washington Spirit. The termination was based on violations from the investigation that Burke had violated. He was terminated for cause that he had violated things in regards to the current anti-harassment policy that exists for the NWSL. Along with the consequence of termination to Burke, the league issued additional consequences to the Washington Spirits. They issued the franchise a ban for all league governance matters, which was ordered effectively, and they issued a 14-day deadline to the club to a response for the violations. Lisa, it's never ending, it feels like.
It is never ending. And we talk a lot about what has happened at Washington Spirit in the main part of this episode that'll come later. But this breaking news, we were waiting for it. We knew that the investigation has closed, and now with this statement, honestly, from the league is fascinating. And there's a lot to break down here. And Sandra, I'm going to use you as our expert and just fire some questions at you. So the main point of this is Richie Burke was originally just put on suspension, and now he is officially terminated.
Yeah, so for people who have been following along, for our listeners who have been trying to keep up with the timeline of things that have been going on with the Washington Spirit, Richie Burke and the Washington Spirit initially had a different exit plan before the initial investigation began. So what was issued was that he was going to step away from the club due to health concerns and then possibly return to a front office role in case things got better. Then the investigation was launched after reporting from the Washington Post, which we go through in some of our previous episodes. So what was issued there was essentially a suspension while the investigations were ongoing. So now that the investigation has concluded, they determined that there was enough there to warrant a termination for cause.
So now that he's officially terminated, also the third point in this statement was essentially that the Washington Spirit has been removed from league discussions at that table. And that looks to be indefinitely moving forward, or how long do we figure that suspension is for the club to be not involved in those league conversations?
Well, one of the initial release stated that it was put into order effective immediately, and further reporting from Jason Anderson out of Black and Red United, local reporter for the Spirit, basically got clarification on that and said that this was currently indefinitely in terms of the ban that is in place for the Spirit. And what that means is they no longer have that seat at the table, like you just alluded to. The league governance meetings take place between NWSL Board of Directors and Commissioner Elisa Baird, alongside trying to make decisions that could potentially affect the league. And ownership, the franchise, is not going to have a role or have a place in those types of conversations moving forward due to these investigations.
How does that affect the players at the Washington Spirit, or does it even affect them?
It's hard to gauge right now. There's about 5 weeks that are left in this regular season. This is a team, this is full of players on a roster that went out and picked up a win after nearly a month of not playing competitive soccer. And it was not easy for them, but they picked up a narrow win, right, against the last place team. And there's a lot of having to do what's considered like blocking out the noise, right, that is with all the stuff that's happening off the pitch and the things that they can only control on the pitch. In terms of how that relates to the league governance band, I mean, that could come into play further down the line when conversations around something like an expansion draft or other things that could potentially affect the league in a larger scale, including all of the clubs, to come into play. It's tough to not have a seat at that table if you're literally ownership of a club.
One of the last things in the press release from the league that really it kind of stuck out to me was that the league has initiated, quote, a process pursuant to which Washington Soccer Properties LLC must respond to the violation notice issued by the board within 14 days. So the Washington Spirit Club must respond to the violation issued by the board within 2 weeks. So what does that mean? What kind of response are they looking for? And perhaps what happens after 2 weeks?
Well, what we know for sure is that it's a deadline. So if the league is putting a deadline in place to the franchise, that means what we know for sure is that there's going to be some type of additional news that is going to impact the future of the club in this 2-week period. Whether or not the Spirit franchise is going to be utilizing this entire 14 days, that we'll all stay tuned for that, and that will yet to remain to be seen. But it is a 14-day period. For me, that reads there's a lot of speculation out there of what to try to interpret what that means. But putting a deadline on it is significant from the league. Part of the reporting that's been happening around this club is the fact that it is happening in the time that it is occurring and that it is so late in the regular season. The league concludes its regular season on October 31st. Playoffs begin in November. And then even at the conclusion of playoffs, if the Spirit find themselves in a deep run within the playoffs and things conclude, there's an expansion draft on the horizon on December 16th. And that's something that is going to impact all clubs. So putting a 14-day deadline on this is very important. What we're going to see come out of that is something that we're all going to have to stay tuned. So no matter what comes out of it, the league is going to be involved in some capacity. So there's either going to be additional changes at the Washington Spirit or there is not. And if there is not, the league will be getting involved.
When it says respond to the violations, does that mean the Spirit must deny, accept, or what happens if they don't respond in 14 days? Do we know?
Not that it was issued in that release initially. As of right now, like I said, that's what they released. There's always going to be that conversation about transparency and what that means for people. For a lot of people, the lack of transparency might mean that they want a detailed report, and unfortunately, for legal reasons, the common public probably won't get that due to the victims that are involved. Mm-hmm. Quite frankly, there are privacy issues at hand. So in terms of responding to the violations, the league is essentially referring to the violations that they've issued to the Spirit already.
Which I completely understand and respect the privacy, especially of the victims that have come forward and confessed, whether it be on the record to the press and to the media, or even just inside these internal investigations to make matters a little bit more concrete for the personnel that are doing the investigation. So makes sense that we won't get too many answers because it is an official investigation around the anti-harassment policy. This is the first year it's put in place. Is that why most of these things are now being unsurfaced, especially at the Washington Spirit, and why this is all being uncovered?
I think that's a huge reason why. Mm-hmm. That's a huge point as to why this is all happening. There wasn't an anti-harassment policy in place prior to this year, and sometimes when a policy is put into place, there needs to be some time to allow it to run its course and do its job, essentially. And what we're seeing today are some of the effects of that. That there was an investigation that was done. And for people who aren't familiar with the process now, because there hasn't been this policy in place in prior years, all of the investigations were done via a third party. So these investigations were not conducted directly by the league. They were not conducted directly by the Washington Spirit. They were done via an independent third party. And these consequences were based on the results that were found of the investigations of a third party.
Well, so we'll expect to hear more from the league, from the Washington Spirit, at least in 14 days' time, from when this news broke, which was September 28th. That's it. Those are all the questions I had for right now, Sandra. So I appreciate it. Thank you.
No, of course. I mean, we're all in this together. We've like
Yeah.
Lisa, you and I have been coming on attacking third. It almost sort of feels weekly now, trying to do our best to keep our listeners and our audience engaged and up to date. And so with us having our midweek episode this week and still continuing conversations about the Washington Spirit and additional updates with that timeline, this news broke and we just wanted to make sure that we hopped back on and provided the extra update for folks ahead of this episode. So as you're listening to this next episode, this next portion, you will get additional details in the timeline occurring with the Washington Spirit. So enjoy that. And we also have our additional mailbag segment and some other fun stuff lined up for you all. So enjoy. Hello and welcome to another episode of Attacking Third, a CBS Sports soccer podcast. I'm Sandra Herrera, lead NWSL writer for CBS Sports, joined today as always by my colleague and co-host Lisa Roman, NWSL analyst and broadcaster. On today's episode, we are coming with you with the news and notes segment and our mailbag segment and a little bit of a surprise segment at the end. We'll keep that a surprise for now. But first, a quick reminder to everyone to follow us on Twitter at Attacking Third. Also, please go to our YouTube page and hit subscribe so that you never miss a new video, an interview, or whenever we go live. You can also catch great highlights, extended NWSL highlights over at youtube.com/attacking third. Lisa, how are you doing today?
Sandra, I'm good. It's good to be back chatting with you. We got some fall weather in the Philadelphia area, which I'm pretty pumped about. Sweater season is coming, but I'm good. Just going with the flow. How are you?
I'm doing good. I feel like we're very autumnal right now. Like you're rocking like a nice like orange top. I've got like my yellow Jordan just like
I
kind
like
of shirt
it.
on. It's like we're very fall right
I've
now.
added pumpkins to my
Oh
background
my
because
god,
it's fall.
we're being like
I had to.
fall. We're being like fall basics, like autumn basics, and I'm fine with it. I
Me
love
too. I'm
fall.
so here for it.
I love fall. I'm excited about it. And fall always means that playoff season is usually right around the corner. And we're keeping an eye on that as usual. But I really love our midweek segments, Lisa, because they are typically our NWSL news and notes segments. And we have incorporated the mailbag segment. So we usually take some questions that we've been given from our wonderful listeners. And we get to chat a little bit and have a little bit more fun and keep things a little bit more loose. So just to keep everybody updated, let's hop into the news and notes portion of this episode. And unshockingly, there are some more Washington Spirit things that we have to discuss with everyone because in our previous news and notes episode last week, we went through a little bit of a chronological order timeline of events because it's been a chaotic couple months for the Washington Spirit. And we just tried to, we wanted to have a place where listeners can go to and just sort of get the rundown of things kind of chronologically. But after that episode, a couple of other things kind of came to light as well. For starters, as some of you have already heard already, they returned to play. So they returned to play. They picked up the victory against Kansas City NWSL. That was huge. It has kept them in playoff positioning and has kept them in the playoff picture overall. But within that as well, there was some media availability leading up to this match day with interim head coach Chris Ward. And during that actual media availability, some breaking news happened, and it was essentially a league directive that was issued. The league issued a suspension to Spirit backup goalkeeper Devin Kerr for failing to follow team staff directives. There wasn't a lot more specifics other than that within this release. But Devin Kerr felt that it was necessary to go on out there because people like to react very quickly to the most minimalist of news. And Devin Kerr went out there to sort of, pour some water on the flames there and tweeted the following in reply to the league's announcement of this. To circumvent all the DMs and assumptions I am getting, some of which are quite aggressive. Yes, I am a fully vaccinated player. And no, I have never tested positive for COVID. Thank you. This one game suspension that she ended up serving against Kansas City NWSL coming in light of all of these reporting and allegations, talking about like Spirit players who are and aren't vaccinated, the continued reports about how did an outbreak happen, some things coming into light with additional reporting from Equalizer about how there was a player who traveled out of market. That is a believed root of all this. So can hardly blame someone like Devin Kerr feeling like maybe needing to get out there and then speak for themselves in this one. But tough to sort of see something like that drop and then just sort of have like a very quick line of text, and it's gonna again that's gonna lead to people to make assumptions, and it's unfortunate that she felt that she had to hop online, so to speak.
Yeah, well, she felt she needed to defend herself and say, "Listen, I don't have COVID, and I never did." The article written by the Washington Post that really dove into this story said that people familiar with the situation said that Kerr violated the pandemic protocols by traveling when Spirit players were supposed to stay in market, which we had heard all of those rumors. But then another person said, reported by the Post, that Kerr had been told by team official that it was okay to travel out of market. So lots of back and forth there. He said, she said, going back and forth. And the Spirit was fined $25,000 for the protocol violations ultimately, and then having to place the blame on a singular player to receive a suspension for a game, and that happened to be Devin Kerr, backup goalkeeper. So I actually like that she defended herself online, because the internet can be really mean and really cruel, and I can only imagine some of the harsh things that were coming into her inbox and her DMs online, and for her to just say, listen, fine, but this is what actually happened, and this is where I am. I'm vaccinated, and being very upfront with that information, and I've never tested positive for COVID. But this story, it keeps going. It is not done being written yet by any means.
Stuff like that, it always has the potential to possibly impact things on the pitch, because we've been talking a lot about so many off the field things occurring with the Washington Spirit, and one of those things being COVID, eventually trickling into the picture with this ongoing saga, and also affecting them on the pitch, essentially having to get those 2 forfeitures and drop 2 games. So big for them to have something like this happen and get, the 1 game suspension, and then still kind of go out there and pick up that win and stay in playoff position against the Kansas City NWSL. But essentially, after the weekend's matches that took place, there was additional reporting via Washington Post with co-owner Y. Michelle King releasing a letter calling for controlling over Steve Baldwin to sell the team to her after allegations of a toxic workplace for women. The letter was posted. It's circulating around Twitter right now. It is available within the Post article as well. But within that, it was a very detailed letter. Within that, it's almost like it's directly to the Spirit community. Almost it's sort of the way that it reads, talking about the environments that were in place. King's attempts to try to establish relationships, personal relationships, working relationships with staff, and by extension, even players. And then wanting to essentially apologize to the larger Spirit community, and sort of lay an outline, list some bullet points of what she would like to see happen moving forward with this franchise. So it's sort of is an I feel statement. It kind of gave me the impression that this particular owner is still very invested into the Washington Spirit and their future. So yeah, that dropped on Monday for folks if they're still looking for the timeline of the news.
Yeah, that it was a really powerful letter. As long it is on Twitter, I highly recommend you go read it. Sandra and I are trying to summarize it as best we can, but Kang basically calls for majority owner Steve Baldwin and CEO to step down and to sell his shares of the club to her. That's what she asked for in this letter. She actually says, quote, "I call on Steve Baldwin to put the club first and honor the commitment he made to Commissioner Lisa Baird and me on August 13th. So she calls him out and says, sell the league, sell the team. She herself is a CEO of a healthcare technology company, and she bought a stake in the Spirit team a year ago. and then the Spirit investors, when women CEOs and owners and investors were really starting to have an influx in the NWSL about a year ago, that's when she bought in. And some of the investors are prominent political figures: Chelsea Clinton, Jenna Bush Hager, Brianna Scurry, who is a former U.S. women's national team goalkeeper. So all of these women are in high, powerful positions within the Spirit organization. And Kang is now making her voice known. They also said in the end of that Washington Post article, it also said that the results of the investigation opened in August against former head coach Richie Burke, the allegations of verbal abuse, and then also the allegations that recently surfaced by multiple female employees of a toxic boys club culture at the club, that the results of the investigation are in. They just haven't been made public yet. So that will be coming.
Yeah, and that was a bit of news that was dropped via the match again. It was Washington Spirit versus Kansas City NWSL, and at this point, it's, if people don't know, you will know now. A lot of the matches are the production behind them are via the league. So if this is coming from this particular match, there's some credibility to that. And the play-by-play announcers addressed it at the top of the game, saying those investigations have concluded and that there was going to be additional information within this next week. So this is obviously still something that we are paying attention to closely and just sort of maybe seeing the conclusion of what that means to those investigations.
And those announcements that the broadcasters read at the top of games or at the top of halftime, they are emailed and printed direct from the league saying, this is what we want you to say about this situation. Speak from experience. I've been handed one of those reads before. So that's how it goes. It comes directly from the league. This is how we want you to handle this situation, because as broadcasters, our job is to just talk about the game, the players on the field, and really not what's happening outside of the field. But sometimes these issues become so big that it affects the play on the field, so it needs to be addressed. So that's where that read initially came from, right at the start of kick for the Washington Kansas City game.
For sure. As always, we're trying to keep the listeners and the audience up to date and engaged. And so it's time for a quick plug. People really do want to take a look at the chronological order of things. If not listening to me and Lisa is something that you are into, you can actually find a timeline of events over at cbssports.com with what has been going on with Washington Spirit, stemming all the way back from August 10th to now in September. I think the last update was on the 27th with this post letter from Michelle King.
And it's written by our very own Sandra. She does a fabulous job. Go read it. It's a great article.
Check it out. It's going to be there for everybody. But yes, again, just keeping everybody updated, and we will continue to do so as news continues to drop.